Hello everyone, and welcome to War in Middle-earth, a series where I take you through all of the major wars and conflicts throughout the history of Middle-earth, from the First Age to the Fourth Age. In this episode, we look at Arnor's continued decline, and its destruction at the hands of Angmar. The fall of the Northern Kingdom and the consequences that followed it would usher in a new phase of the Third Age, where darkness would begin to take the upper hand. In the previous episode... wait, that's not true. It was about 5 episodes ago. In the previous episode on Arnor, we looked at the decline of the Northern Kingdom, its eventual split, and the first phase of its war with the Witch Realm of Angmar. In the year of 1409 of the Third Age, Angmar had invaded the Northern lands, annexing Rhudaur, devastating Cardolan, and pushing Arthedain to the brink of destruction. Only a timely intervention by the Elves saved the Northern Dunedain, and their counterattack left Angmar severely weakened, but not destroyed. This allowed for a lull in the fighting, but Arnor was in no position to recover. Rhudaur was permanently lost, Cardolan was reduced to a rump state holding out in the Barrow Downs, and even Arthedain's power barely extended beyond the walls of Fornost. King Arathor, who had bravely led the defense of Fornost at the age of 18, following the death of his father Arveled I, inherited a kingdom barely a third of the size of the one that his grandfather Argaleb I had originally claimed. Arathor's reign was spent recovering Arnor's strength, and was fairly unnotable following 1409 except for one event. The strange people who had been living in the lands of Rhudaur for centuries began to move westward, although some of them fled back over the Misty Mountains. Seeking a safe haven from war, these peoples began to move into the lands around Bree. These people are none other than the Hobbits. Arathor died in 1589, having ruled for 180 years. He was succeeded by his son, Argaleb II. 12 years into his reign, in 1601 of the Third Age, 2 hobbits named Marco and Blanco sought permission to migrate into the lands beyond the Baranduin. These lands were bountiful and well-tilled, but had been empty for many years, used mainly as a hunting ground for the kings of Arnor. Needing all the help he could get, Argaleb accepted Marco and Blanco's proposal, provided the hobbits acknowledged the lordship of the kings of Arnor, maintain the roads and bridges in that land, and help any royal messengers that might be passing through. The hobbits accepted, thus founding the Shire. This was a positive in Argaleb's reign, but it was soon to be followed by more pain and misery, which wasn't exactly out of place in the north at this point. In 1637 of the Third Age, the Great Plague sweeps into the northern lands, having already devastated the lands to the east and south. Cardolan is hit especially hard, with many of the people of Minhiriath perishing. The plague eventually reaches the Barrow Downs and kills the last of the remaining Dunedain who still lived there. With their deaths, the kingdom of Cardolan is essentially no more, leaving Arthedain all alone to face Angmar. Shortly afterwards, the Great Plague reaches the Shire, killing untold thousands. Fortunately for Argaleb, the Great Plague had become so diminished by the time it reached Arthedain that his people were hardly affected by it. With Cardolan's demise, the Witch King sent evil spirits from Angmar to inhabit the Barrow Downs, making them a place of danger and fear. This would have further restricted the Dunedain of Arnor, robbing them of more fortified, useful territory, hastening their decline. I'm going to talk about this a little more, but in the comment section instead, so jump down there after you finish this video and have a read of what I have to say. I hope you find it interesting. Argaleb II died in 1670, replaced by his son, Arthegil. Nothing is recorded during Arthegil's reign, but it can only be assumed that Angmar's power was beginning to return. What is notable is that when Arthegil died in 1743 of the Third Age, he was only 190 years old, showing that even the lifespan of the Dunedain of Arnor was beginning to hasten in its decline. His son, Arveled II, also had an unnoteworthy reign, dying in 1813, aged 180. However, Arveled II's son, Araval, would not experience the peace of his father and grandfather. Sometime during his reign, war with Angmar renewed. We're completely in the dark when it comes to the details of this conflict, and the only thing we know is that it culminated in a battle in 1851. With the help of the elves of Lindon and Rivendell, Araval defeated the forces of Angmar somewhere in the lands of Cardolan. We're unsure of the scale of the victory, but we do know that Araval attempted to press his advantage by reoccupying the lands of Cardolan. However, the settlers he sent to the Barrow Downs were driven away by the Barrow Wights, effectively ending his ambitions. In the end, it seems Araval's victory merely delayed the inevitable. Araval died in 1891 of the Third Age, succeeded by Araphant. Despite Araval's victory, Angmar began to attack again during Araphant's reign, and it became increasingly clear to the Dunedain that they could not hold forever. In 1940, Araphant managed to contact King Ondahur in Gondor, which was a big deal as the two kingdoms had been estranged for many years, at very least since Gondor pulled their garrison from Barbad in 1636. Ondahur was keen to accept the alliance, even marrying his daughter Firiel to Arvedui, Arafan's son. But at the same time, Ondahur admitted that Gondor could not spare the aid at the moment, as their war with the Wainriders was about to renew. I mentioned Arvedui, so let's talk about him. Born in 1864, he's the only known son of Arafant, and his birth was an important moment in history. At this time, a man named Malbeth the Seer gave a prophecy to Arafant. Arvedui you shall call him, for he will be the last in Arthedain, though a choice will come to the Dunedain, and if they take the one that seems less hopeful, then your son will change his name and become king of a great realm. If not, then much sorrow and many lives of men shall pass, until the Dunedain arise and are united again. In other words, something significant would happen during Arvedui's lifetime, and depending on the outcome of that event, Arvedui would become the king of a great realm, or the last king of a dying realm. Well, this event happens in 1944, when King Ondahur of Gondor and his two sons are killed during the disaster of the Morannon. Ondahur has no male heir, so Arvedui claims the throne of Gondor, using his direct descent from Isildur as well as his marriage to Firiel as leverage. The Council of Gondor, however, rejects this claim and instead chooses Eärnil II, Gondor's victorious general. Arvedui's claim is rejected, but his descendants would not forget. Arafant dies in 1964, leaving Arvedui as king. During Arvedui's reign, Malbeth the Seer makes his second prophecy, that which would eventually predict Aragorn passing through the paths of the dead. Say what you want, but Malbeth wasn't a bullshitter. It quickly became apparent during Arvedui's reign that he would in fact be the last king, unless help arrived very shortly. Angmar was on the offensive, and by the autumn of 1973, it was obvious to Arvedui that the Dunedain of Arnor could not hold on any longer. Desperate, he sends a message to Gondor requesting aid, and King Eärnil accepts, and begins to gather his army, but it would be months before they could reach the north. In the winter of 1974, the Witch King of Angmar launches his final assault. Arthedain's defense shatters, Fornost is taken by the Witch King, and those Dunedain that survive, including Arvedui's sons, flee west across the River Lune. The Shire folk had sent a company of archers to Fornost's defense, none of these ever return, and they too are overrun by Angmar's armies, forcing them to flee into hiding. Arvedui does not want to give up on his kingdom that easily, and attempts to hold out in the North Downs for a while, but he is dislodged and flees north, eventually ending up in the old dwarf mines of the Blue Mountains. Eventually, hunger forces him out, but he gets help from the snowmen of Thorkel, the Lossoth. When Círdan learns that the king is in the north, he sends a ship to extract him, and against the warnings of the Lossoth, Arvedui boards the ship, and soon perishes in the freezing waters when the ship is crushed by ice in a storm. Among the losses are the two of the Palantiri, that of Anúminas and that of Amonsul. Gondor's army arrives by sea in 1975, led by Eärnur, Eärnil's fiery son. Despite having been in decline for many years, Gondor's army is so great that the elves and men of the north are awestruck by the size and power of it, and it's said that it was only a small part of Gondor's power. Accompanying Gondor's army are horsemen from the Vales of Anduin, the Aethiod, and Círdan and Aranarth, Arvedui's eldest son, soon gather together the elves of Lindon and the remnants of the men of Arnor. The hobbits of the Shire, loyal and valorous to the end, send another company of archers to aid their fallen protectors. It was too late to save the kingdom of Arnor, but Angmar still had to be dealt with. And in Fornost, his captured prize, awaited the Witch King of Angmar. Upon seeing the armies of Lindon, Gondor, and Arnor cross the Lune, the Witch King pridefully set forth with his own army, thinking to easily drive his enemies across the Lune, just as he had done before. But this time, he faced an enemy more than his match, and he would soon learn this. Battle was soon joined between the hills of Evendim and the North Downs. Angmar, although having terrorised lands of the north for centuries, was no match for the armies of Gondor, and began to retreat towards Fornost. But as they retreated, Gondor's cavalry rounded the hills of Evendim, coming down from the north and smashing into Angmar's flank. Witnessing his army rout before his shitty Nazgul eyes, the Witch King gathered what he could of his forces and fled towards Angmar, abandoning Fornost to his foes. But before the Witch King could reach Carn Dûm and organise a defence, Gondor's cavalry overtook him, as well as a force of elves from Rivendell led by Glorfindel. Its armies broken, its defences laid to waste, Angmar is utterly destroyed, and it's said that not a single man or orc of that realm remained west of the Misty Mountains. And, does that include the women and children too? Because, damn Glorfindel, I think that might have been too far. At last, the Witch King revealed himself to his foes, and charged directly at Eärnur. Those around him were paralysed with fear, but Eärnur had balls of steel, and would have withstood the Witch King had his horse not bolted. The Witch King laughed at that, wounding Eärnur's pride, but the Witch King fled shortly afterwards as Glorfindel arrived, vanishing into the night. Eärnur returned afterwards, angry and ready to pursue him, but Glorfindel warned against this, uttering his famous prophecy, "Not by the hand of man will he fall." Eärnur conveniently forgot that part, but he did not forget his own humiliation. With Angmar destroyed, Gondor's army returned home. The remaining men of Arnor, led by Aranarth, were now left to pick up the pieces of their shattered realm. But the Dunedain were now too few. Most of them had perished, and their homes and places of strength had been destroyed or defiled. Aranarth decided that he could not rule a kingdom that did not exist, and thus he took up the mantle of the chieftain of the Dunedain, and his remaining people would become the famous Rangers of the North. They would protect the lands of Eriador, which had once again suffered untold devastation, not seen since the War of the Elves and Sauron. The Shire had survived, as had the town of Farbad and small settlements of men in Breeland, but most of Eriador was now desolate and depopulated, and at least during the Third Age, it would never recover. Our story now turns south, as the events that conspired between Eärnur and the Witch King would soon have follow-on effects. Following his defeat in 1975, the Witch King would flee the north, abandoning the remnants of Angmar to the Aethiod, who would conquer what was left of the kingdom in 1977. Around 1980, the Witch King and the other Nazgul would arrive in the lands of Mordor, seemingly undetected. Most of the Gondorian garrisons had been abandoned following the Great Plague, and the last garrison at the Black Gate seems to have been abandoned at or after the disaster of the Morannon. In that time, and probably before that, evil creatures had once again begun to multiply in Mordor. In the year 2000, they came through the Nameless Pass behind Minas Ithil, presumably with a large army, and besieged the city of Minas Ithil. The siege lasted 2 years, and for some reason Gondor was unable to break the siege, and the city fell in the year 2002. I'm going to do a separate video on this where we explore some theories as to why this actually happened. The city would then become Minas Morgul, the chief city of the Witch King, and a place of death and dread. King Eärnur II died in 2043, leaving the throne to Eärnur. Even as he aged, he was still obsessed with martial prowess and had little time for anything else, even having children. Upon his ascension, the Witch King sent word to Eärnur, challenging him to single combat, attempting to take advantage of the king's pride. At the request of his steward, Mardul Voronway, Eärnur declined the challenge, but he did not have the wisdom to decline a second challenge in the year 2050. Before departing, he left the crown of Gondor on the lap of his dead father, where it would remain for nearly 1,000 years. He then left with a small company of knights to the Morgul Vale, and he was never seen again. It soon became apparent that Eärnur would not return, but the Council of Gondor was reluctant to crown a new king. Eärnur had not left an heir, and no claimant had a strong enough claim to trump all others. Fearing a second kin strife, the council decided that the stewards would rule Gondor in the king's stead, until the king returned. Through his deeds in Angmar, the Witch King had destroyed one kingdom, and left another kingless. Now that's efficiency. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting. It felt fitting to end this episode on a somber note, and in fact, I feel like the whole episode was kind of somber, as I think that's what this point in Middle-earth history really is. If you've played Lord of the Rings Online, then you'd know of their fantastic take on the story of Eärnur, and that sort of helps me see him as one of the more tragic figures in Tolkien's writings. I've got new stuff coming soon, trying out some different types of videos. We'll see how that goes. I'm also going to try and upload more regularly. I would have had a video out last week, but my computer was out of action for a week. Anyway, thank you, farewell, and remember, if a completely evil demonic wraith challenges you to single combat, then it's probably not actually going to be single combat.